1959 is a very special year. It's not only the genesis of metabolism, a year where many things happened. Microchips, birth control pill, the space race, the computer revolution, the rise of pop art, free jazz, new journalism, Castro emerged, Malcolm X, Motown, the generation gap happening. It's a very, very long list. Everything happened in 1959. And last but not least, also Chris Marker did his wonderful Little Planet book about Japan in 1959, the same year Metabolism emerged in Japan.
Maybe it might be good to go back to the genesis of how metabolism entered into your metabolism. In other words, when did you, in fact, come upon it, Rem Koolhaas, and when did it start to mean a lot to you?
Go back longer than the time I was an architect. I would say that the first susceptibility, perhaps is a better word, to the metabolist happened when I lived as a child 4 years in Indonesia, recently independent, and therefore had an experience as an Asian, went to Asian schools, spoke Indonesian. And so from that moment I actually have a considerable obsession with Asia, and in that obsession Japan plays a big role, because for architecture it's a utopia in the sense that they cannot build a building badly, and so I've one time had
they cannot build a building badly.
Really, the aesthetics of movement, everything in transformation, life cycles, birth, growth, that was the idea. And when we started the research, as Rem described, it was actually a very strange thing, because it could have not been more unexpected, because we arrived in the house of Kikutake, in the famous Sky House. It's actually a very interesting thing is that we expected a futuristic scenario and a futuristic conversation, and we were immersed in a conversation about the Ise Shrine, Kikutake's obsession with the past, this famous shrine which is more than 1200 years old, which is a continuous timeline, long discussions about the Katsura Villa, about this detached palace. It had all to do with memory. And basically the Sky House, which you see here, and Kikutake explaining his three-step methodology, was really the idea of a very open architecture, a large space for myriad kind of functions, the metabolist idea that it could actually be changed whilst it's being used.
What we discovered, where we first thought that these were individual people working together more or less casually, in the end, when we had really penetrated the mysteries of the movement through interviewing not only the protagonists but also the ecology around them, their families. But when we finally came to a bureaucrat who also had been trained by Tange to be an architect, Tange positioned the bureaucrat in the main bureaucracy of Japan. And in doing so, Japanese architecture has a kind of permanent supply of commissions. And what we discovered is that basically the metabolists were not only creative people, but their creativity was to some extent sponsored, and to some extent even an extension of the imagination of the state. And imagination and state are not typically words that you hear together. And for that reason, for me it was fascinating that perhaps what we were witnessing in this movement is the last movement, that state and creative sector, and maybe together forming the public sector, could plan or think about a country and a future.
I have rarely known anybody who celebrates bureaucracy. You seem in some way to think that bureaucracy and imagination at one point in time went hand in hand.
I know it's not a kind of very popular concept, and I know that kind of probably all of us or all of you have very little experience of the moment. But nevertheless, there are key moments where it would be justified to talk about a creative bureaucracy. What we also discovered is that what we at first thought were independent propositions actually were an almost military campaign to deal with the weaknesses of Japan. Japan is prone to earthquakes, tsunamis, it is mountainous, and it has a kind of very pixelated property structure. So what we discovered that there is actually a blueprint where both on the ground, on the sea, and in the air, plans were made to address what was Japanese inherent problem, and that is why we called the book Project Japan. So land, sea, and air. I would say as one example, and that was another experience that I actually personally had, the building of the tunnel between England and Europe, for me, was a very important and creative step in which the bureaucracy played a massive role in transforming Europe. And so there are identifiable moments when that creativity is launched and orchestrated and organized, and simply having had that experience makes me aware that it's perhaps the driving and most important creativity that we can think of.